What it do, cuckolds? It's your boy, the hater, up in this mug. Hater at home, you know what I'm saying? But I'm walking around recording this video because that's how the hater rolls. I always switch it up. Today's video is going to be about the reality that befalls us with respect to the fact that we do not have enough people that are of a reasonable age being pushed, all right? Now, I know what some of you are thinking already. You're thinking, hater, don't you always clamor at having people like John Cena come back? Yes, that's true. But here's the difference, dumb fucks. John Cena was pushed when he was young and then rode that into his retirement effectively now, where he is still a big deal. There is a difference, obviously, between John Cena and Jey Uso being pushed or someone else being pushed. Now, I can hear all the dumbasses, curling up in their seats. Oh, he's backtracking on Jey Uso. Absolutely not. The way that things are now, I can't think of anybody that probably makes a better winner for the Rumble than Jey Uso. Either we've seen the people win the Rumble, like Seth Rollins or Drew McIntyre, or it's another old person like CM Punk or John Cena. I would have liked John Cena to win, but I think that the Royal Rumble would have been less entertaining if that happened. Now, what I'm getting at here is this, right? The last few big deals, I put that term in severe quotes because I would argue that there are no big deals in wrestling, but the last few big deals have been, let's just say, CM Cuck and Cody Rhodes and Drew McIntyre, right? Those are the three that have been pushed in these last few years, right? They are the ones that have been in the main event. You could throw in Lashley there as well. But basically, that's it. It's been those guys and Roman Reigns. Roman Reigns does not apply in this video because, number one, right now he's a massive mid-card nobody. But two, he was also pushed when he was young. He was pushed from day one. And in some ways, so was Seth Rollins. Seth Rollins should have probably been a mid-carder, but it is what it is. Now, everybody else that I mentioned was pushed when they were older. And they also have one other thing in common, and that is that all these guys that I mentioned are people that at one point or another were young guys in the WWE one way or another. Lashley, Drew, and of course, Cody Rhodes. CM Punk is a little bit different. He was pushed he was pushed when they got him, right? And now he's getting a push. It's just a continuation of the fact that they want to treat him like a main eventer. So he is a little bit different, I will concede, but let's focus on the first three. In my opinion, it applies to CM Punk too, but I could see people having some legitimate arguments against that. So, think about it this way, right? You had Bobby Lashley, you had Drew McIntyre, and you had Cody Rhodes. You had all these guys, and you didn't want to push them. They were in the same position that people like Austin Theory and Braun Breaker are now. They're in that same, or Oba Femi even, if you want to go to the NXT people, right? You have some people in their 20s, basically, that could be pushed, but they're not getting pushed. And why aren't they getting pushed? Well, because they have to make room for the Drew McIntyres and Cody Rhodeses and even Lashley's of the world, right? That's the problem. The problem is you had these guys and you didn't push them when they were young, presumably because they weren't good enough or some other reason. You know what I mean? Obviously, if you have Randy Orton, you have no reason to push Drew McIntyre or Cody Rhodes. You have Randy Orton, you know what I mean? You don't need to worry about the future for some time, But the fact of the matter is that these guys weren't pushed when they were young. So, the logical trajectory for someone like Austin Theory, or let's say Braun Breaker, is to get unceremoniously fired after being put in a jobber faction or being given a jobber comedy gimmick like Stardust, and then they can go to TNA and maybe New Japan, do fucking nothing there, then come back and say, these people have grown. There's nothing that pisses me off more than this argument that Cody went to the Indies and reinvented himself. Cody went to the Indies and became John Cena with blonde hair. That's all Cody did. He didn't develop any new moves. He didn't develop a new personality or a character. He's the same guy. Now, people seem to think that Cody Rhodes wearing a suit is a big deal. He just copied Conor McGregor, to be this presentable champion. He doesn't have the charisma of Conor McGregor, but basically, that's all they're doing is copying the same things. Drew McIntyre doesn't even wear a suit. Drew McIntyre is out there doing his own thing, cucks. He isn't wearing a suit. He's just being regular old Drew McIntyre. Yeah, he grew some chest hair and got into better shape because, obvious reasons. But the fact of the matter is he's the same guy. He has the same promo cutting ability as he did in 2007 or wherever the fuck he was fired. It's the same guy. So the argument then becomes, well, if these people aren't good enough to push when they're young, why are they good when they're old? The answer that the WWE gives us is that they went out and grew and reinvented themselves. But it's like, we need evidence of that. You know what I mean? Drew McIntyre going to TNA and starting that group like The Rising or whatever, which was a complete disaster. That is not like reason enough to bring him back and then push him to the moon. Same thing with Lashley. Lashley is the one that you can actually make this argument for because he wrestled the majority of the time outside of WWE because he left so young when he was in WWE and he was getting a push, but it wasn't getting there. You know what I mean? So the fact of the matter is, why are you hiring, let's say, Austin Theory now and just wasting money on him like you did on Cody Rhodes and Drew McIntyre when you can just let him go immediately, have him go in the indies, he can wrestle like Will Ospreay or something a couple of times, and then he can come back as Austin Theory in a suit, and you just push him, right? Does that seem like a viable business model or a viable logical model? Like you just get them at the tail end of their careers like Cody Rhodes, and then you hope to get a few good years out of them by forcing them down people's throats? How about instead, you just take Braun Breaker and you just push him to the moon immediately? At last night's NXT, which obviously I didn't watch, I read the results, and Stephanie Vaquer, who, to me, she's like, all right, she's an attractive enough girl. She's got ram horns on her head, but whatever, Apparently she's a good wrestler. I couldn't give a shit. But the reality is that at the very least, she's getting pushed, right? She's relatively young. She's a woman in NXT, so it doesn't, this doesn't necessarily translate to like a push, but you know what I mean. She's relatively young, and she's out there like getting pushed over people like Julia and Zarya and these people that were supposed to be big deals, At least somebody is getting something out of this. You could make a similar argument for Obafemi if it weren't for the fact that the NXT title is completely meaningless. Like, it's been held like 95% of the NXT champions are complete jobbers. They're colossal jobbers like Andrade and Adam Cole. Like the good ones don't even hold the NXT title. They just go through NXT and then they're on their way, So the idea is, if you want to make stars, you do have to start early because, number one, you want to find them when they're young so that you can then exploit them for longer periods of time instead of having them go make money for, when I say make money, go make $35 for like ROH, You want to take advantage of them. And clearly, the people in charge are not good at gauging like the lifetime value of a wrestler, because you have people like Shelton Benjamin or the Hardys that, like, if somebody said in 1997 that these guys would be around like almost 30 years later, people would be like, what are you really talking about? 30 years, they're going to be old men. But they're not old men. They're like near 50s or at 50. So the idea is you want to take advantage of these things sooner rather than later. And then by doing that, you also establish, like I did with John Cena, that this person really is a big deal. That's how you make a legend. A legend is not someone that gets good at 40. Like Cody Rhodes, you can go on like cagematch.net or whatever. You can see his win-loss record. It's like 75% losses until he came back, or until he went to the Indies, which obviously those wins don't count. Because like Stevie Richards is like has like 60% win record probably in the Indies. In the Indies, like fucking Kurt Hawkins is like a relatively big deal. He's like a multiple-time tag team champion. WWE, he has like one win and like 345 losses. So what I'm getting at here is this. To make a legend, you need someone that's consistently good. And when you really have someone special, like let's just say Braun Breaker for the sake of argument, because he's good and he's young, right? You push him to the moon. There's absolutely no reason why Braun Breaker should spend a year of his career dealing with the likes of Ludwig Kaiser and Pentagon. You know what I mean? He is above them in every reasonable metric, and he should be treated as such. That's the issue that I have with wrestling, Like, while I thought that the Jey Uso John Cena situation captured this a little bit, it's not as effective as, let's say, when they had Velveteen Dream, who I thought was going to be a big star, or someone like Braun Breaker. If you have these guys, like if Braun Breaker comes in at number 3 and just like wins the Royal Rumble, that's a huge deal. That makes him feel like a big deal, And he's a much better candidate than like basically everyone except for Cena that's involved in a main event match this WrestleMania, and at this point, last WrestleMania as well, because Roman Reigns he never became it. You know what I'm saying? Like if we're being honest, Roman Reigns never became the massive star, He was like a big deal for a couple of years, and, before and after that, clearly, he's just an afterthought, you know what I mean? So the reality is, like, his run overlapped too much with, like, Cena, basically, Cena was just too big of a deal, so they just gave the belt to Cena. And then you had, like, AJ Styles and other people that, deserved it to a certain extent. But you get what I'm coming from, right? What I'm saying here is rather straightforward. If you want people to do good in the future, you got to treat them good now. Because otherwise, what prevents WWE from doing to Obafemi what they did to Drew McIntyre, which is saddling him with a jobber gimmick, giving him a Kozlov gimmick with like a Santino type character, firing his ass, then he goes to like New Japan or something, he beats some unknowns, then he comes back and I'm supposed to believe that he's better now. All of a sudden, like Cody Rhodes is the biggest example of this because at least Drew McIntyre is massive. So like while he was gone, like the company was filled with tiny dudes like Adam Cole and Kyle O'Reilly. So it's like compared to them, it's like a god next to like a little boy, But people like Cody Rhodes, all of a sudden he's back and he kicks out of moves that he would not kick out of when he was in his prime, in his like late 20s. Now he can like hold his own. He can like Hulk himself up. He has no moves he didn't have before. He doesn't do anything different, but for some reason it's just more effective now. All of a sudden Cody came back and now all of a sudden he wins. Nobody explains why he wins. He just wins. So the only thing that we can conclude from this, from a kayfabe perspective, is that while Cody Rhodes would have trouble wrestling like Paul Burchill as a pirate, clearly Paul Burchill as a pirate is superior to Seth Rollins, the former world champion, because Cody Rhodes beat him like 4 times in a row. So what am I supposed to believe about Seth Rollins? That he sucks? The guy that you've been telling me is one of the best wrestlers in the world for the last like 10 years, all of a sudden loses to Stardust? Like, they overlapped, I'm pretty sure. Like, the Shield was there. Yeah. The Shield was there when Stardust was around, And like, if it was Cody Rhodes and, whoever hell his partner was back then, he had a partner. I forget who it was. Because it was like him and his partner versus like Tensai and Brodus Clay, but it didn't happen at WrestleMania. It was Cody and some other jobber. Who the hell cares, I don't even know who the partner was. But let's say like Damian Sandow or someone of that caliber. Like, it was those guys getting their asses beat by the Shield day in and day out. And when Cody Rhodes and Goldust won the titles from the Shield, it was presented as this like epic, upset of gargantuan proportions because both Cody and Goldust were undercard nobodies, and the Shield guys were presented as like upper mid-card quasi-main eventers. So back then, he can't beat Seth Rollins, but now he comes back, nothing's changed. The only thing that's changed is he wrestled some guy named Takadashi in like all elite Japan wrestling, and he wrestled Felipe Escalante in AAA, and all of a sudden we're supposed to believe that this guy's better, that he can beat Seth Rollins. It doesn't make any sense, and now he's going to beat Cena, and none of that makes sense. The much more intelligent thing would have been you highlight this guy as a potential champion, as I'm sure they did at some point, then you push him steadily, like they did in the beginning. He becomes the mid-card champion because he's so young that he can afford to spend like a couple of years like in his early 20s. He signed when he was 19. He can be like, until age 23, 24, he can be in the mid-card, picture as he gets a character, etc. Then you push him to the main event and you would have had a main eventer for the last 15 years. You would have had another John Cena. I mean, obviously, you wouldn't because it would be Cody Rhodes, but you understand what I'm getting at. And this is the same mistake that they keep on making. When was the last time that a young guy was presented the way that Brock Lesnar was presented? Now, I know what some of you smart ones are thinking. Hater, none of these guys are Brock Lesnar. I agree 100%. Absolutely none of them. Not Braun Breaker, not LA Knight, sure as shit not Obafemi. None of these guys have anything on Lesnar, but it doesn't matter. The point is you can take these types of guys and present them as such. Present them at the very least like a Randy Orton. Why isn't Austin Theory presented like a Randy Orton, like a guy who's like young but is an overachiever? Why is he presented like a jobber? At this rate, I'm pretty sure it's safe to say that the Austin Theory like experiment is over. Just fire him already. Get it over with. Send him out to like, what's the, not Noah, Pro Wrestling Noah. Send him out there so he can wrestle some Japanese jobbers, and then he can come back when he's 38, and then he can win the Royal Rumble twice in a row. Just do it. Just do it. Just stop wasting money on them if you're not going to push them yourselves, right? But why do that? Why not take the few people that are good, that have something there, and push them now? This just makes more sense. By doing this philosophy, right, the implications are that someone outside of the WWE is better than at least most of the people in the WWE. So Cody Rhodes comes in, and he's better than everyone in the WWE because he wins the Rumble 2 years in a row. Then he wins the title, and now he's going to main event his third WrestleMania. Technically, he's a 4-time WrestleMania main eventer if you count night one, which obviously we don't. But think about that. At this rate, he could have main evented 10 WrestleManias. Why did he have to leave? You see what I'm saying? Why did he have to leave and go somewhere else to come back and all of a sudden be treated like he's better all of a sudden? It doesn't make any sense. If he was so good this whole time, he would have been good the entire time he was in the WWE. But if he got better, you need to explain how he got better. For example, Jinder Mahal, I bring up as an example. He's someone that left for like a few months and he came back. He's a different person completely. He looks completely different. So you don't have to ask yourself, how did he get better? Because you look at him and you're like, oh, clearly he got better. Right? Drew McIntyre, you can make a similar argument, not as strong, I think, but a similar argument where you're like, oh, this guy came back as a different person. Cody Rhodes came back as the same guy with just blonde hair. So the issue is like, why put everybody through this? Why make everybody leave? And when you do that, the implications change. At least as far as I'm concerned, in the Attitude Era, right, the implications were that the lowest level wrestler on the card, let's say S.A. Rios, or perhaps, aside from like Gilbert, who's like a comedy jobber, but the lowest level wrestler, right, like Crash Holly. Crash Holly, who was presented as a jobber who had some success. Crash Holly, like S.A. Rios, fucking Dean Malenko, Scotty 2 Hotty, all of whom, except for Dean Malenko, are guys that stood out, by the way. But nevertheless, these guys were presented as like the lowest level of the highest tier of wrestling. Meaning that if Scotty 2 Hotty were to go to Ring of Honor, the expectation would be Scotty 2 Hotty is going to be a multiple-time Ring of Honor champion because he's a guy who had success in the WWE. And this is exactly what happened. Jamie Noble, who may actually have been the lowest level jobber, I don't think he's ever been in one WWE video game. You know what I mean? This guy went and became the first ever Ring of Honor champion. And I like Jamie Noble, don't get me wrong. I understand he's a talented guy. But it doesn't change the fact, or he's like either the first or the second Ring of Honor champion. Like, it doesn't change the fact that these guys who had some perspective, who had some name, would go and would dominate the indies. Because the implication was, sure, The Rock can beat Jamie Noble. Sure, Kane can beat Jamie Noble. But if you put Jamie Noble against Felipe Escalante, then Jamie Noble's going to win because he at least wrestles in the same company as the likes of The Undertaker and Kane. Nowadays, that's not the case. Tozawa is not presented as being better than the next indie jobber they're going to hire. You know what I mean? Tozawa is just a low-level jobber in WWE. Otis is like, it wouldn't be shocking, for example, if like, let's say Alexander Hammerstone comes in and just squashes Otis, right? Which begs the question, well, if Otis is this squashable, why do you keep paying Otis money? Why didn't you hire Alexander Hammerstone before, right? If Seth Rollins is this much of a jobber that he can't beat Cody Rhodes, then why in the blue hell is Seth Rollins getting opportunities while Cody Rhodes is being left to fester in like, Ring of Honor or NWA fighting like a 56-year-old guy? Why is this being like allowed effectively, right? That's the problem that I have. None of this makes sense. WWE no longer treats itself as the highest echelon, right? They accept that there's some sort of parity between them and other companies. They're like, oh, Tanahashi, like, they'll be like, Nakamura won the same title Brock Lesnar won. Like, you're trying to gaslight me to thinking that Nakamura and Lesnar are on the same level. Like I have eyes, motherfuckers. I know that if Brock Lesnar wanted to, he would beat up every man in the history of New Japan. You know what I mean? Like, within minutes. And every man in the history of WWE or WCW or TNA, and there's no shame in that, it's Brock Lesnar, right? But what I'm getting at here is, why do this? Why have it be this way? WWE should sign the prospects that have some validity and some capacity, not waste their time with like Kushida and Ikemen Jiro and fucking a bunch of other jobbers from Japan. Sign the good ones. Sign the good ones when they're 23. But instead what they do is they sign Tama Tonga. They bring him in here. He skips NXT for some reason, right? Because he's a Polynesian. I guess he's from the islands, so they can put him in a storyline. He skips it, and all of a sudden he's a big deal. Like, you have Jacob Fatu coming in here and destroying Apollo Crews, who in my opinion would beat his ass in real life, number one. But beyond that, you have him coming in here while the likes of Apollo Crews and Baron Corbin can barely get TV if they're still in the company. They get no TV time, and it's like, are you kidding me? Well then, when you hired Baron Corbin, why didn't you look to your left and right and say, why don't we get the Fatu guy instead? Why? Why did you hire one guy over the other? There has to be some logic. The longer you are in WWE, the more your stock should rise, right? And this is also reflected in the video games, for example, right? So like Kofi Kingston is a great example. He's a former world heavyweight champion. He's a former WWE champion who won at WrestleMania, and his rating on the video game is like lower than fucking Jimmy Uso, who's accomplished fucking nothing in his career. You know, at the very least, Kofi Kingston is a multiple-time mid-card champion and a multiple-time, well, he's a one-time world champion, but a multiple-time tag team champion, right? His rating should automatically be like adjusted at like, I don't know, let's say 86 or something, right? But it shows that WWE doesn't have any respect for him, because tomorrow, like when Obafemi and Tony D'Angelo debut in the main roster, they're going to be rated higher than Kofi next year because Kofi's a jobber. You know, it is inexcusable to let the people that stayed in your company, meaning they were good enough to avoid the firings. Kofi Kingston was good enough to not be fired like Cody Rhodes, or or at least not want to ask for a release like Cody Rhodes. He was good enough to not be fired like Jinder Mahal and Drew McIntyre. So why is he inferior to them? What should happen is Cody Rhodes should come back, right, and he should job to Kofi Kingston, and then maybe work his way up so that it's believable, right? And then maybe show him like lifting weights or doing something that makes you believe that he's getting better. Not like the implications are Cody Rhodes sucked. He left. He wrestled a guy named Tim Storm, who's like 56 on NWA. He wrestled Magnus, who's now an authority figure called Nick Aldis. And all of a sudden, I'm supposed to believe that he's competitive against John Cena or The Rock or Roman Reigns. Have you people lost your minds? This is the same guy that would get squashed by Kane in like 5 seconds. He would run in, Kane would just grab him by the throat, choke slam, the end, cuts, and that's how that would go down. So in my opinion, WWE needs to focus on pushing their young guys, like when they're still young, to maximize the profits. Cuckolds.